Greetings and salutations. Ben here, Jim here, you there. This is the Sunday night hanging, well, right here on Sundays. Unless you're watching on the replay, and please say hello on the replay. And like, share, subscribe, comment, rant, rave. I don't know. Interact. Algorithms and all that stuff. And we're going to be talking amplifiers, specifically Gibson-based amplifiers. But we're open, if someone has a particular question, fine. And we had 21 people, and then it was 18, now it's 25. What I think that is people that want to smoke, but they're not allowed to smoke inside. So they're dipping in and out. I get it. So let's, we'll give those in the chat. I'm going to start way back. We got Herb of Fireside Studio an hour ago in here. He says, I hear this is where all the guitar junkies hang out for their fix. You're right. Then we got Terry's 3Gs, which is Gretches, Gibsons, and Guilds. And if he gets a 4th G, it could be a Glary. And if it was a 5Gs, it'd be a G&L. Sure. He was on with Charles 75N chatting. Charles. Earlier today. Fun show. Hobo Roadies here. Benjamin of New Zealand is here. Like your name. Mr. BHB, I believe that's Bruce. That is Bruce. Paul McNary and all the cats. They're all here. Hobo Roadies here. Blue Mox in the house. Ferd Burful. Who else? Dave Chase. It's like a Water Buffalo meeting. Hit Metalworks. Who else? Who else we got here? Dave Chase. Hit Metalworks. Blue Mox. We'll talk to each other. Billy Baloney. Perfect. Yep. Good to see Billy in here. Guitar Man 45. Let's see here. Dave Chase. Yeah. Charles 75 ends. Lurking while cooking dinner. That's fine. We got Unfucking Believable in the house. Awesome. Michael B. Live. Brother Michael. RJ the Mad One. Nice. Noise Bloom. Symmetry. Brother Trev. What's up? Casey Lee. Dastardly Dave. OU812. Ryan himself, Chief Bottle Washer over the OU812 network, and affiliates. That's when someone else also simulcasts, I guess. Affiliates. I don't know.
Can you put up a poll, Ben? You know how to do
a poll?
Yeah.
I could.
Ask people if they've listened to the new Gibson Amps. I want to know how many people have listened to them.
That's a good idea, especially while doing this. Gauge with the audience. Start a poll. Oops. Boom.
It'd be interesting to know how many people have actually listened to these new amps.
Starting the poll. Yep. And back. Who else we got here? Marsha Murray's here. Dastardly Dave is here. Awesome. Terry Himes. John Shane. Brother John. Bruce said it was a raid, Ryan. I think some people are peeing before, in between shows. I guess. Stephen Douglas is here. Who else we got? Jeff K. Eddie Van Haskell. Nice. Scrolling. Jeff K. Internationally Insane Studios. That's Dana Lurking While Insane. Sure. Okay. Bo's like, Gibson has a new... Yeah, we're going to talk about the Falcon and the 7 and the 12 watts. Jason Lindholm's here. Awesome. Steve Rezer. I don't know. He's never really... If he came on a Water Buffalo meeting, he could tell me. And then, let's see. Michael Krause is here. Absolute Mayhem. Delayed raid. Exactly, Bruce. Well, we're not as quick as we used to be, is what I'm saying, So... Let's see. Bring the poll back up. How are we looking on the poll? 34% say yes. 66% say no. Based off 32 votes, out of 48 people. That's poor voter turnout. That's poor, folks.
Modern democracy.
You can't complain if you don't vote. That's the way it works. BC Rich 581's here. Awesome. All right. Mark Taft in the house. What's up, brother Mark? All right. There we go. Now let's go over to see if I shame more people in it. Well, No, it was 33. Now it's back to 32. No, it's back to 33. Somebody's wavering. Clearly, somebody was wavering. Blackjack guitars.
I was curious to know how many people listened to them and had any idea. The reason I wanted to talk about Gibson Amps is we kind of mentioned it last time I was talking with you. I think during our Buffalo meeting. And so I went out and listened to them to compare them to the vintage amps that I own. I was curious to know how many people can have looked at them enough to understand what they are.
37 votes in at this point. 68% saying no. Okay. Terry Himes.
That's right. Two-thirds. Two-thirds haven't listened.
All right. We're going to end the poll at this point because we figured it.
Yeah. Right. Just trying to get an idea.
Well, and you know what? And let's be honest, folks. There's going to be a certain thing. Like some people are into guitars, some people are into pedals, some people are into amps, some people are into all the above, some people are into 2 or 3. So, yes, that makes sense. Okay, it's fair. Mark's gas station.
My vintage Gibson amps for probably a good 10 years. So I'm real familiar with their vintage sound, at least of the stuff they built in the 60s.
Sure.
And the one thing that Gibson always said is they were never going to make them bright like those damn Fender amps. They hated the sound of Fender amps.
Yeah, they always thought they were way too bright. And
yeah. They wanted them to be more of a jazz box.
Yeah, I was going to say, you see how jazz players rolling off the tone knob. So they're like
playing on the neck pickup.
You know, save your tone knobs, folks. We'll take all the bright out of it. You'll think you're playing through a bass amp with a blanket over it. No, you're not.
If anybody who thinks they're going to go out and pick out a vintage Gibson amp and sound like they're playing through a Gretsch or a Marshall or something like that are in for a big surprise because they don't sound anything like that. They're a very dark amp. Even if you put in a speaker that's leans toward the bright side, it's hard to brighten them up without modifying them. That's where
comments. He's actually tried the new Gibson amps.
Yeah, did you crank it?
Didn't spend much time with them though. Preferred the smaller one, but would rather have a Princeton.
Yeah,
right. Heard the design is bad like other Mesa. Yeah, well, it's probably there's some kind of circuit board that's going to be hard to access, and you're going to bust 14 knuckles servicing it every time. Sure.
Yeah, and of course, in typical Mesa fashion, they don't publish any of their schematics, so I have no idea what they did. Here's my impression. When they came out and started playing the amp with their demo song to start out with,
right?
It sounded like a fuzz pedal. They had a fuzz pedal hooked up because all the dynamics were squashed out of it, and it was clipped to hell, and it sounded just like a fuzz pedal. I went, well, that's a weird way to demo a new amp with a fuzz pedal. I found out that's not what we're doing at all.
DMAC didn't crank them. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Michael Krause says, so you need a treble booster. I love my Mesa. Sorry, not sorry. That's fine. That's fine.
No, I don't have a problem with Mesas. My only problem with Mesas is having to fix the damn things.
Yeah, they're great until you got to service them. Exactly.
Pretty much, you have to go to a Mesa service center to get them fixed. Which, just like going to your local GM dealer, you're going to pay a premium to do that.
Is that bonkers? Okay, his comments. Yep. Very fuzzy and dark.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they came across dark to my ears. At least not the demos I saw. I thought they were actually fairly bright, but it may have been their choice of settings in their guitar too.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, once you get past 6 on the volume knob, very fuzz-like. Yeah. Which very strange choice for a Gibson amp. That's never been how they sounded.
Danon says the amp he wants is the Trainwreck amp that Pete Thorne played, my favorite amp ever. I get it. You have expensive taste, but it's a dream amp. I have decided I want a Bogner. Will I ever get one? Fuck no. But I want one.
I'd love to have a Trainwreck, but what is there, like 300 in the world or something? There's not very many of them.
Yeah. I don't know which Bogner I want, but there's one that Michael Nielsen demoed. And as soon as he hit one chord, I went, that sounds like Jerry Cantrell. I need that in my life.
That's probably a Shiva. The guy from Tool plays those too.
Blackjack Guitar says, at that price, it should be hardwired, no boards. No, boards are fine as long as it's serviceable boards, right, Jim?
Well,
that's my understanding. Like, there's boards and then there's boards. Like,
last time we talked, people asked me, what do I find better, hand-wired or printed circuit boards? And to be honest, printed circuit boards are more reliable. They just are.
Yeah. There's a difference between through-hole and surface mount, too, folks. Like, that's a whole different ball game as well.
Yeah, surface mount is disposable. You can't really fix them because all the leads are so close together, and they use wave soldering to put them on there and stuff. You can't really fix surface mount stuff. You can, but it's just as cheap to buy new boards and throw them in there as it is to fix them.
All right. Now, I'm going to tender this comment with for now, because we're talking Bo. So for now, the only Fender amp he has is the Cyber Twin and a Music Man HD 130 combo head. For now.
There's nothing wrong with those Cyber Twins. Those Cyber Twins have really good amplifier sections, output amplifier sections, and the preamp section was well designed. I mean, the only problem that I have with them, and I haven't personally experienced, is it's all computer controlled, and once again, you're down to, if you have a problem, replacing boards.
Right. What's up, Jimmy?
And the Cyber Twins are getting old enough that the replacement parts are going to be a problem shortly. You know, that's the one thing I always liked about early Fenders. They were designed like brick shithouses and made to be fixed.
Oh, you just wait, Jim, too. Next Water Buffalo meeting, which is coming up soon. So, like, this Wednesday. This Wednesday.
Yeah, you're running out of Wednesdays.
Yeah. No, I really, no, we discussed lifestyle choices. I forgot. Charles sent me the link already, I believe, and stuff. But Bo has got a few more amps on display behind him now. He's looking very Tone King-esque. I'm just saying.
Kind of looking like hip metal works with his special background.
Yeah, exactly.
What'd you get, Bo?
Yeah, he just started pulling out more and more heads and stuff, and he's got, different camera angle showing off more heads and stuff. Maybe, Herb. Maybe. You seem to have a life or something. I don't know. You're too busy you're too good for us is probably what it is. You know.
I got a broken JCM 2000 sitting right over that way a little bit. I'm supposed to be fixing it. I need to get my workbench cleared off and fix it. It develops a little bit of a fuzz to it after being on for about 10 minutes.
Mm.
When it's cool, it works great. I suspect it's I fixed the amp once. I put in a whole bunch of cooling fans to keep the temperature down because this is one of the original JCM 2000s, mm-hmm. and they were shipped with bad boards in them. When the boards got hot, they off-gassed and they became conductive. And it was just a flaw in the materials.
Sure.
The one way to fix that and make them last longer was to cool it down inside and take the pressure off that the board. So I put all kinds of cooling fans. Well, he must have blown a tube, so he took it into this fancy Marshall guy who looked at all that and said, "Oh, get rid of all this shit. You don't need it. They run better hot." Took all of it out, threw in the hottest tubes he could get in there, and now it's back on my shop desk, needing a new board.
What's up, the Lawnmower Tapes?
So I'm not real sympathetic to this one because I had it fixed and I knew what the fuck I was doing, and some special Marshall guy decided that he knew better than me.
Sure. He's not a water buffalo. You can tell, folks.
That's all right. It's not my money. It's somebody else's money. So if you want to, I fixed it once for free. This one's not going to be free.
Exactly.
I got to monkey with it twice and put up with somebody else tearing out perfectly good work.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it in a way that didn't trash anything. All he had to do was just leave it alone and put it back like it was, and he could have been just fine, but instead he didn't. I did non-invasive work. That's how I do things.
I appreciate that, Stephen Douglas. He says, just reiterating what Michael Nielsen stated earlier today, the online guitar world would collapse if Ben Coombs woke up one day and said he's done. I think he meant from a moderator side of things. I was like, yeah, I also do content there, Michael. You've been on here twice.
Content.
Yeah. Speaking of which, next week we will be discussing amps a bit, as well as rack gear with Michael Torin. Yay. That's going to be fun. Just made me think.
Yeah, I've got some really old Gibson amps. The oldest one I ever had was BH4, which is the third amp that Gibson ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Really crazy on the inside. Again, the capacitors had all dried up, so I left the ones in there alone, and I put in some things that can be easily removed that replace those caps. It works great now and looks just as vintage. And if somebody ever decides they want to make it same as it was, all they have to do is unsolder a couple wires and solder them back to where they belong, and it's right back to where it started.
Okay.
I hate people who booger vintage amps.
Yeah.
Especially when it doesn't need to be done.
Yeah. Don't do anything that's undoable, unreversible. That's it.
Yeah. You look at it. Did you see Uncle Larry's, Tom Bukovec's post today? Where he's got
I didn't see today's
vintage Marshall that somebody decided to drill a hole in the back on. Yeah. Putting in a master volume on a plexi. See, the dumb thing is you can do that without boogering the amp.
Right. I was going to say, like, yeah, that used to be a pretty common thing. Somebody would have a master volume installed on the back.
Yeah. But you can do it in a way that, replace the back panel, put the hole in the replacement back panel.
Yeah.
Rather than drill a hole through the chassis.
If you do that mod in 1977 and kind of, I get it, because it was just a Marshall at that time. But if you're doing it today, shame.
Most of those were done, during the early 80s when everybody wanted that loud sound.
Yeah.
Preamp distortion without overdriving the. Let's face it, 100-watt amps are loud.
Yeah, if you got questions for us, if we miss it, make sure question marks in the front or tag either of us or stand it with super chat, or if you're a channel member, you can do a milestone message thing. I don't know how that works. I'm not a channel member. You tell me.
The other thing that people need to learn about vintage Gibson amps, especially from the 60s, is they made some unusual tube choices. While Fender picked the 12AX7, which became ubiquitous throughout the industry.
Right.
Gibson didn't do that. They picked the 6EU7, which is exactly equivalent to the 12-volt tubes with a different pinout and only a 6-volt heater. And the 6-volt heater was designed so that it was connected in a way that was low noise. If they're really hard to find because nobody makes them anymore. So if you have trouble finding a 6EU7, you're going to have to booger your vintage Gibson and have it rewired. Because you can set them up to be run properly by rewiring the base of the tube. It doesn't ruin the vintageness of the amp, but there's no other way around it. If you're forced into going to a 12AX7 or an ECC83, you're going to have it rewired.
Bo says his Marshall Plexis have the master installed on the back.
Yeah, it's common.
Yeah.
And probably all done during, the late 70s, early 80s when everybody wanted to be able to crank the preamps without being so loud. I like Eddie's solution.
Well, he did he did a combination, right? He did a bit of a Variac thing, and he'd put stuff in front of the cabs to deaden the sound.
Yeah, but he didn't put in a master volume.
No.
He boogered plenty of amps and guitars. I mean, didn't he ruin a 59 Les Paul?
He ruined a lot of guitars.
Yeah. That's what happens when you drink and decide to modify guitars.
Well, and again, let's be honest, it wasn't vintage gear at the time. It was the late 70s, early 80s. It was just old gear.
Yeah. Although 59 Les Pauls have been known about since 1963.
Yeah. Exactly.
They've had a reputation for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, like I get it with the guys that would take because it would have been the first year of the humbucker was 57. Oh, the 57 gold tops, and take off the gold to see what's underneath because hopefully it's a decent piece of wood and you could burst it. But that was sort of like, I remember like my dad and his buddies, all with their tellies with the finishes all falling off and was, well, do I take the finish off and hope it's a decent piece of wood because they would just do a clear coat, natural look, or am I going to have to respray it blonde again and it won't look the same because it's a refin and it ruins it in their opinion. Yeah. So
nowadays you wouldn't touch a finish on a 50s Telecaster.
Exactly. Oh, then again, yeah, but Dad was embarrassed too, right? Like the same way someone will say, "Oh, it's a Squire," kind of embarrassed. His was, well, it's not pre-60 or pre-CBS. Like, so it's only by a few years.
Yeah, the what really amazes me is to watch these, 73 Strat. People are treating these things like great vintage instruments. They're vintage, but they're not great.
It's amazing, whatever's at someone's price point. Like, oh, I want to get into vintage guitars. I like Les Pauls. I don't have a budget. Oh yeah, 70s Les Pauls. They're great. You snag them up for $5,000. Blah blah blah. Well, yeah, because they weigh 12.5 pounds. They have a fucking volute on the back. Like, no.
They got the pancake bodies and the volute and maple necks. There are good Norland guitars. Gibson didn't build all trash, just like during the 50s, and not every instrument that came out of the Gibson factory was a miracle. Exactly. There are dog bursts out there.
Yep. Well, it's like the 70s Fender stuff. It was hit and miss. Half of it was good, and half of it wasn't.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. Both companies were trying to cut costs. They were using older tooling by that point. Too cheap to redo their tooling. So tolerances aren't exactly what they were.
Yeah, and it wasn't until everything crashed and burned finally in around 1980 that they decided that they had to abandon that and start over. And look now, they're building some of the best instruments ever. I still say that the instruments coming out of the Fender and Gibson and Guild and Gretsch and Ibanez are some of the best instruments ever made.
Mm-hmm. What's up, Mustard?
I'm not going to live long enough.
I love my 76 Les Paul, but its construction is so weird, right?
Yeah, the pancake
electric guitar was a 72 Les Paul Deluxe. Pancake body, volute, plain top tobacco burst, which I was fine with that.
No dish hardly on the top at all, just a light maple cap.
Yep. I had the mini humbuckers because it was a deluxe because Gibson figured, oh yeah, everybody wants mini humbuckers. Nobody wants mini humbuckers. They want them, they'll buy a Firebird, Gibson. That's how it works.
How do you really feel about it, Ben?
Part of that's the regret of selling said guitar.
Now we got it. Now the truth comes out.
That's part of the reason.
Mini humbuckers have a place. I didn't think they necessarily sounded bad.
At the time, one, I was young, and two, but I couldn't get that AC/DC sound, because they didn't have the same output. They were lower output. It's just
And pedals weren't a thing then,
Yeah, well, they were, but they were the only pedal company in business, and there was no internet, and the only local stuff, it was Boss, and then Peavey had a line at the time, and because this is country world, fucking Peavey rules. So it was the PV pedal, but those pedals were like comparable to today's prices. It was like $200 plus for a pedal. Like, I can't afford that, And everybody had a solid state amp, so that even if you had a decent overdrive pedal, it's not going to hit the amp like it should. And
that's why so many people use things like
distortion into a solid state PV. Of course, it's going to sound like ass.
that's why people use like tape decks. They use the preamps in those to drive their amps because they had good sound and they did that job. Nobody even thought about could be a pedal. It was just part of it. Look at what Terry Kath used.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see here. Mustard says got a Shabbat Lion this weekend. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Yeah, they are nice. Shabbats are really nice guitars. I don't own one myself. Got a few friends that have them, and they all love them. Unbelievable says, Jim, thoughts on the SLO 30 for repairs / service? Any tips?
I haven't been in one. My best buddy just bought one, and they sound fantastic. I'd love to play it. I'm going to see him this weekend. I'll actually take a look inside for you, Chris, and I'll talk to you again about that. So
nice.
I will report back. I promise.
Michael Nielsen was talking about them today when he was live, and he's just like, yeah, it's like, forget what he said, like 85% of an SLO 100.
Yeah,
but as a 30, he's like, and it's a lot of goodness.
I have one of the guys that I jam with has the Rev 20, and my best bud has the SLO 30. Boy, they're both great sounding amps. I'd take either one.
See, that's what I was like, oh, because the SLO 30, I was thinking about that too, because I'm kind of bored with the Marshall, and I'd like to move it and upgrade to something else. Ideally, like a Friedman JJ Jr. or a Bogner of some kind, but those are the fantasy amps. In the meantime, I'd like the
SLO 30 should be a fantasy amp too. Those are $3,000.
Yeah. Well, I figured, maybe Chris could lend it to me, for
yeah,
a decade or so, and it can just sit there, and he can look at it and hear it every Monday night,
or Sunday night, and twice in Buffalo meetings every month.
Yeah, he's like, no, Ben, no.
I will look inside the amp and let you know. I suspect it's probably a lot like a Friedman on the inside. It's being all built.
Oh, yeah, because they're both built by boutique amps, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's all boutique.
Yeah. Hip says to check out a Rev. Yeah. Revs, I don't know. They have a sound, and I'm not sure if I want that sound, Hip. That's what I'm saying.
I like it.
Yeah.
Like I said,
yeah. And Unbelievable says, no. Well, there we go. So the hunt continues for an amp. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that.
I have a 66 Epiphone here that you can borrow. No, you can't, because that's my fun takeout amp.
Right. No, I know what amp of yours I'd want to borrow. Your brown face.
If you want, surprisingly, a Metal Zone turned down where you're not driving it hard has a really, really good tone section in it. If you want to brighten up a Gibson amp, a Metal Zone is actually a really good way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can go drive the mid-range and the high end up enough to make a difference.
Let's see here. Stephen Douglas says a Bogner Shiva 20th anniversary is the best deal going and is my favorite Bogner. I've seen them for $1,500 on Guitar Center used. Yeah, that's well. I'll be close to 2,500 Canadian. Oh, yeah,
and probably another 5,000 Canadian to ship it.
Yeah, right.
Those things are big, heavy amps.
Mark Taft says, I need another amp like I need another hole in the head. LOL, 3 amps here already. Yeah, I can relate. Actually,
yeah, you'd look funny with a 4th hole in your head, Mark.
I'm going to get that one out of the way. The PV Classic 50's going. I never use it. I just got to get rid of it. Thoughts on Gibby's Lab series, aka Ty Tabor's amps back in the day?
I like the sound of it. That was what I consider Gibson's 4th era. At the time, they had abandoned the solid state stuff that went so poorly. In the late 60s, they did their first conversion to solid state that really, really, really did not do well.
Right.
And so they kind of got out of the amp business and got back in the amp business when they bought Moog. And the Lab Series was well designed. But it has a sound,
Yeah.
and some people like it and some people don't. Some people just have hands of God. Ty Tabor has hands of God.
Right.
He could play anything and make it sound good. So I wouldn't necessarily take Ty Tabor's playing as an example of how easy it is to get great sound out of those amps. It's kind of like a Mesa Boogie.
Mm-hmm.
If you can dial them in, Mesa Boogies are some of the best amps ever built. Problem is, they're so versatile that it's hard to find that sweet spot.
Yeah.
I've known people who've played one for 2 years, finally gave up on frustration because they could never find how to get that tone out of it.
Right. I get it.
It's got the graphic equalizer, it's got all those controls in the back, and it's just crazy how configurable they are. And
right.
It's really easy to go from, boy, that doesn't really sound good, to, oh my God, that's buzzy.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Mark follows up. I'm certain they'll buy another amp from Ben in the future. Really? Okay. Well,
I hear there's a PBB50 that's in your future.
Yeah, I was like, I've run out of really, unless you get the vintage Canadian cheap on stuff that needs service. It's all big boy amps here, Mark. Or you want the solid state half stack, which is the half stack version of the 212 I sold you.
What do you got there?
I can sold anyways, because I ran into my old drummer from One Day to Live, the amp I used that, or the band I used that amp in, and he's looking for a guitar amp. And he's like, I always like the sound of that. I'm like, really? Take it. Take it. I plugged into it a month or two ago, and I couldn't get a tone out of it.
Did you ever fix that old cab that you ran across?
No. I'm going to wheel it out here and put it underneath that amp, though, soon. And that'll be moved over to there, so I have a little more space between my stereo setup, so I get a little more stereo effect.
Well, that's something you could always do. Find an old set of stereo speakers and put them in there and use it for a stereo speaker.
Well, and also, like, that cab's not working. That cab doesn't have speakers in it. That I took the tubes out of. That one's.
So what you're saying is you got a Ted Nugent display there.
I've got a lot. I got a whole lot of nothing going on.
One amp that works and 15 cabinets to support it.
Yeah. So I got a typical, TV show backline. Is what we're saying. Most of the cabinets are merely load bearing. That's it.
Good thing you had the roadie.
Right.
Can you hold my cabinet?
I was looking at all that crap for nothing. Yep. Let's see here. Scrolling back, I saw a few things I want to touch on. Stephen Douglas, I thought the Jakey Lee 50 was any month now. Nielsen said earlier today he didn't think it was going to come out this year. That I'm not sure. I know he's pushing his Plexi type thing. That's the bell of the ball right now. And I know he still has his Vox AC30 clone that he's working on. And that's been in the works for years, but I know it's near completion, so that could be out this year as well.
I think if he focused on what he's best at, the Marshall and high watt type heads, I think he'd be better off.
Yeah.
I
don't know why. Yeah, like other than the fact that apparently it sounds like he's got a really nice AC30 in his collection of amps. I get it. And he wants to recreate that, but it's like, doesn't Morgan already have that market covered?
Exactly. It's
So I don't.
And when you think great sounding AC30s, you don't go, yeah, Friedman, that's the guy I need to talk to. It just doesn't put together. Not that I'm sure he's not going to build a great amp. I'm just not sure that even if he built the best one, that
Right.
that would attract that clientele.
Well, and I would, because he does know tone, so it's like I would take his advice. And if he literally said, like I'm looking for a really, really, really good AC30, and if the choice is, what's currently on the market, and he's like, no, I can build something superior to what's on the market. Okay, you're bending my ear. But if you're just building something that's contemporary with what's already on the market, I'll just get what's already on the market. In that sense.
Yeah, I mean, what's the one AC30 thing that Pete Thorne uses all the time? He's got a certain head that.
Yeah, the top hat.
Top hat, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's already somebody on the boutique end, and then there's the Morgan, which kind of sits just below that. And then, of course, you can still buy AC30s.
Yeah. And then Matchless, aren't they a AC30 as well?
Matchless is kind of all over the map. They did that's where they kind of made their bones, was in an AC30.
That's what I thought. Yeah, like I seem to remember, like with all the country guys with their OG Matchlesses that are all.
But then they also did their own stuff,
I'm sorry, I love me an AC30 on occasion, and I love me some Telecasters, but Nashville guy, let's play a Tele through an AC30. Really? Ooh, there's no hiding. There is no hiding in that.
Yeah, you're gonna stand out in that mix.
That's yeah.
Yeah, let's put a Range Master on that.
Right? Hobo Roadie says, I have a couple pairs of Celestians for you, Ben, but Posters is not easy on the speakers. That's a path I no, I don't want to go down right now.
I think he was talking
if I have speaker cabs to power them, and so that's a slippery slope too. So we're just no. I appreciate that though. Jeff T's in the house. Somebody else popped in. Oh, Josh Tamberg. Josh, who doesn't like checking his email. Tamberg. Just saying, Josh.
I think you're being invited to be on the show.
Michael Cross says Dr. Z or Zed makes an AC30. The Moz. Okay. Matchless DC30. Billy Baloney mentions. Okay.
Yeah. When I think Dr. Z, I'm always thinking Trainwreck clones. That's where he became a thing. He actually knew the guy who made Trainwreck.
Yeah. Jason says, I bet that Marshall sounds delightful when it's cranked up. It's pretty good, but you'd be better. All right, well, there we go. Breaking news. Josh Tamberg will be my guest on March the 3rd, Sunday, March 3rd, 2 weeks from tonight.
Somehow I had a feeling that you were inviting him to be got to catch him before he leaves the country and can't join us.
Well, I kept thinking, I've been meaning to for a while, like months. And then, like, his last Buffalo meeting, he was all talking about getting new interfaces and, mics and headphones and this and that and the other thing. Monitors. I was like, hey, right. And I kept forgetting to email him. And I finally remembered. What's up, Ian's Guitar Shack? Good to see you. So there you go. Yes, breaking news.
Anybody played the Gold Tone era stuff from Gibson? Because after the Moog series stuff died and Gibson crashed and burned not so elegantly in the early 80s, in the early 90s they went to Seattle and started working with some of the people there, and they developed the Gold Tone amplifiers.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually did more than that. They worked with THD and made Gibson branded hot plates for a year.
Okay. What's up, Scott Brockway? Hobo Roy says, don't you have a 412 that needs speakers? Yeah, so I have a 412 that needs speakers. I have a 312 that I believe needs speakers. And I have a 215 that needs speakers. In theory. But then I need stuff to power them. So I don't.
Well, you got that Marshall head sitting there.
Yeah. And I'm keeping the 212 cab. I really love that Marshall 212 cab.
Yeah, 212s are really great.
Trevor and I were talking that the thing that's the speaker that's in everything, like the G75 blah 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 speaker that comes in everything, and it's got a vintage 30, I believe, on the other side. So
see, my Randall came with a G75R or whatever that is, the Celestian. I didn't like the sound of it. I ended up putting a vintage 30 in its place.
Nice. Zach Dong is here. Great to see you, Zach.
I think the reason those G75s became so popular is they offered probably a really good deal to all the manufacturers to take them, to produce them in volume.
Right.
And
yeah, because they're in everything.
Like, so the manufacturers could buy them cheap and put Celestian speakers on the outside. Because Randall, exactly. my combo amp, had made a big deal out of the fact that it had Celestian speakers in it.
It's like for years, all the guitar companies had the Duncan designed humbucker in all their HSS guitars.
What does that mean?
Yeah, really? Right?
I mean,
just because he designed it doesn't mean you built it to spec either.
Yeah, I mean,
that means nothing to me.
Okay. I mean, how hard is it to... It's not like humbucking pickups are some esoteric thing that nobody understands.
So he gives you the program to put into the pickup winder of how many winds and what kind of offset said winds are. Is that the design coordinates to punch into a machine? Like, I
think it also has to do, what kind of magnet material are you picking, and that kind of thing.
Let's see. BC Rich says Gibson had a nice bass head back in the early 90s.
Yeah, that was part of that whole gold tone era.
Okay.
I'd really like to have
I don't recall the name that was discontinued and brought out, refaced as a different
amp. The gold tone era was the best era of Gibson amps ever. They sounded great.
Nice.
Problem is they were just so damn expensive. That was the same era that Paul Rivera was working at Fender and that general vicinity.
Where spelling counts. Terry says, so your concussion, I'm assuming you mean conclusion. Then on the new Gibson amps is that they're basically Gibson badged Mesas?
Well, absolutely they are in make. I mean, they're not trying to hide the fact that it's being made in the Mesa Boogie plant. I don't think that was ever in anybody's doubt. I wouldn't say they sound like a Mesa Boogie. I'm not quite sure how I characterize the current sound of these Gibson amps. I'm not real pleased with them. At least so far of the demos. I mean, I might try to stop at a music store here. I'll probably go down to Motor City Guitars here in the next couple of months and see if I can play with it.
Terry says, yep, concussion, not conclusion.
Yeah, pretty much.
Fair enough, Terry.
So, they really are a Mesa Boogie designed amp. Randall Smith designed them. I mean, they're Mesa Boogie through and through, made in the Mesa factory. They don't look like a Mesa Boogie. They don't have the controls of a Mesa Boogie. But I would imagine their construction on the inside is very, very similar. Everything crowded into little tiny areas, and because they are very big amps. I mean, holy cow, they got a 14-watt single-ended Class A amp. My God, what a power waster.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Charles, 75N that is. Thoughts on the PV Delta Blues? I always thought they were nice amps.
I've never played one.
I don't know if I played one or not, but I've never heard bad things about them. Those people that had them, they really swore by them.
Yeah. There was an era of PV in the early 90s that they were pretty hard to beat, for value and for construction quality. all the way through the end of Harley PB's era. Once he retired, then that's when PB kind of went to hell in a handbasket.
BC Rich has a Delta Blues combo with a single 15, not the twin 10. Nice. Yeah, the single 15, that seems to be the secret weapon. And Jeff T, yeah. So if he says, so if you have a concussion, buy a Gibson amp. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
if you're
pretty much you need a concussion.
Buy a Gibby amp. Yeah.
Well, let's back up a little bit. I said something there that maybe most people don't realize. Both of these amps are Class A amps, which means they're single-ended. They're not push-pull amps. The problem with that is it's exceedingly power wasting to do that because the tubes idle at 50% all the time. So there's always current flowing through the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on a push-pull amp, the current opposes each other, and it doesn't have any output at zero volume. But with a Class A amp, there's always current flowing through the tube, and it's biased so that it's idling at 50%. So your tubes are always running hot. And the harder you play them, the hotter they get. Well, you can imagine that's kind of wasting a lot of power. Now you're putting 14 watts out that way. That's just an incredibly wasteful amount. Plus that, in order to transfer that and put it through a speaker, it requires a huge output transformer. So those amps have to weigh a freaking ton.
Right? Well, yeah. Hashtag Mesa backbreakers, right?
So also now you need a bigger power transformer because you're consuming more power. So all these things keep adding up to higher and higher and higher costs just to build that amp. I know why they're charging what they're charging because they got a lot of expensive hardware in it, but it just doesn't make sense.
Mustard asks, is the fan in the Gibson amps a sign of poor design, heat management?
It's a sign of running a Class A amp at 14 watts.
Yeah.
No, the fan isn't a bad idea. I have a 50-watt Randall amp that's running 6L6s and EL34s that has a fan in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sign of a company that realizes it heat's a problem and kills electronics and puts appropriate treatment in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. You're more than welcome.
It's hard to keep them quiet, Even my Randall, you can hear the fan run.
Aha. Unbelievable ass. Jim, all techs hate working on Mesas. Why? Long explanation needed.
Okay. Number one, they don't publish their schematics. So when it's broken, you have no idea what any of these things are doing on these boards. Two, they use surface mount electronics all packed together in very tiny areas. So all the heat and everything else kills these boards, and you can't fix them. You can't even get them out to test them. So it's a really difficult thing. Somebody brings in their amp and says, hey, this has got a scratch, after being warmed up for 10 minutes. Okay, take it to Mesa Boogie dealer. And you know what the Mesa Boogie dealer does? They go through the white paper and say, oh, yeah, there's a report of that. It says replace board 4. That'll be $500, please. You plop a new board in, you go, I only paid $700 for the amp.
Yep.
So they're expensive to fix. They don't publish their schematics. Even if they did, they're difficult to fix. They're poorly designed as far as their tolerance to heat because they pack. Look at how small those amps are. And they're, the early ones put out 100 watts. How do you put 100 watts out in a 12 by 12 amplifier with a speaker in it and keep those amps cool? You can't do it.
No.
And they bias their tubes hot. I've watched multiples of Mesa Boogie amps melt tubes. They red plate. They've got them biased so hot, they red plate. That's just poor amp design. They're trying to get as much volume out of them as they can, but they're burning up amps. I need an amp that's reliable. I want to be able to take it out to jam, play it all night, put it back in the car, take it home, and know that it's going to run again 3 weeks later when I go to play again.
Yep. Listen, I couldn't tell you how many hours are on it. Hundreds.
Yeah.
It still sounds great.
Was that a long enough explanation, Chris?
Let's hope so. Blue Mock says he says I got a 60-watt PV Triumph, just had it rebuilt, bought new then. Fantastic amp, hard to work on. Okay. And then Rich says he's beginning to realize that if his Mesa ever breaks, I'm going to have a lunchbox head that's only useful as a real lunchbox. Yep.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep.
You know, I don't hate the sound of Mesa Boogie. I like the sound of Mesa Boogie if somebody knows how to dial it in to get the sound out of it. But, man, as an amp person, I sure don't trust them.
Oh, he loved it. Unbelievable. That's a fine answer. Okay, there we go.
Okay, good. Well,
Nice. Oh, we're going to go a while longer here, folks. Some great content here. I think we got the deep dive here on the Gibby amplification, folks, which, it's like, ooh, like when we heard that Gibson amps were coming back, are you excited? I'm like, no. Why? I'm like, because I've never seen a video of Joe Bonamassa being horny over finding a Gibson amp. Unless it was like perfect in showroom condition because it's a 1 of 1. That's the only way he would be horny about a Gibson amp.
I don't want to give the wrong impression about Gibson amps. Not every Gibson amp was the same in its design. There were especially the Les Paul series, the GA79, the stereo amp that they designed. They didn't make the same mistakes with that. They didn't put that same circuitry in there that made it dark. So they sounded really good. And, when they developed the ES series guitars, they needed a stereo amp. That's why they designed those stereo amps so you could plug in and have 2 amplifiers with 1 case.
Mm-hmm.
Those amps sounded really, really good. But also everybody else picked up on the fact that they sounded really, really good and are rare as hen's teeth and you can't get them. I mean, if you find a GA79 out there, it's either beat to hell or you're going to pay through the nose for it. They're $7,000 amplifiers these days. I'd love to have one.
Symmetry, Brother Trev says, wasn't the Master of Puppets flavored with Boogie? I dig that tone. Yes. Kurt Hammett talked about that in his interview with Beato. I want to say Mark III? That they used?
That was the Mark III era.
Yeah.
The thing about the early 90s is Mesa Boogie was they were out there giving amps away or giving amps or selling amps to artists at cost to get out there. So that's why a lot of the grunge era bands used Mesa Boogies. I realize Masters of Puppets was a bit before that, but.
And Unbelievable says, I'm just picking on Brother Jim. He's an awesome dude. That's right. And then Charles comments, dude, a fella's eating spaghetti and drinking beer. Clean up on the set. Did you also facepalm with the garlic bread, Charles? I'm just wondering. Billy asked, what do you think about the early 60s Falcon amps?
I like them. That was some of the good era of Gibson. Depending on what one you got, I have the Falcon amps were a little bit higher powered. I think they were 30 watt. I have the 15 watt, the Explorer. They were well designed amps, but they've used the same circuitry that darkened the amp. They have a high end roll off filter that throughout the whole amp, and the only way to get rid of it is to bypass it, which boogers your amp. So they all had that same flaw. It was just a decision that Gibson made as how they wanted their amps to sound.
Yeah. They didn't want to sound bright and tinny like a Fender.
Exactly. They hated the Fender sound.
Yep.
There's memos and other things in Gibson factory where they document this very fact.
Well, it makes sense because Gibson was always that, that going for that traditional jazzy big band market in many ways, which I get, because that's what popular music was. Fender happened to come in right at the end of that with a different design, with a different pickup, which is going to sound different, and then with a whole different amp. So, and it's that Michigan, California. There was that California sound, as it was called. Well, not everybody wanted the California sound.
Well, there was different styles of music that they were intended for. I mean, Fender was definitely aiming at the country and dance market at the time and the early rock and rollers. Gibson never aimed at the rock and roll market, ever.
No. Nope.
Their whole thing was jazz. I mean,
yep.
Even the Les
Paul and Chet Atkins. That's what they wanted. Les Paul and Chet Atkins. That's it. The jazzy Chet Atkins, not the country Chet. Different. There we go. What's up, Corey's Garden? Good to see you. And Chris says, I'll have follow-up questions in the Water Buffaloes meeting. Well, there we go.
Okay.
This Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, I do believe.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer your SLO question until after this coming weekend when I get together to play. I'm going up north to a beautiful cabin and taking the instruments, and we're going to have a weekend of good food and jamming.
Oh, that's like the best.
It's on one of the nicest lakes in Michigan. There's a place up by Traverse City called Torch Lake.
Nice.
It's considered one of the top 10 most beautiful lakes in the world.
What's wrong with that?
It's a gorgeous lake.
Billy Baloney says, Fender won the youth crowd in the 50s and the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they were catering to that. They, Dick Dale.
Really, they didn't even go after rock and roll initially. Like you said, they were going after the country market. And then they finally, with the Strat, that was doing okay. Then they handed it to Buddy Holly, and good thing they did.
Well, Dick Dale comes into that picture. A lot of the surf music was being, let's face it, was built on treble,
Yeah.
And so a lot of the artists that were developing that kind of music were in Southern California at the time. Where would you go if you needed somebody who could design you an amplifier or a guitar for that kind of sound?
Right.
You'd go to some guy down the road. You wouldn't go all the way halfway across the country to Gibson Guitars to have them design that for you. You'd go to Leo Fender.
Exactly.
I love Leo Fender. I wish it was around when he was around. I'm old enough, but by the time I realized what he'd done, he was gone.
As much as I love stuff that he's done, there's like several times I want to go, why? Why did you call this backwards? Why did you do this?
Tremolo versus vibrato and
tremolo.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Other way around.
Yeah. You even call it a tremolo circuit in certain amps and vibrato circuit in other amps.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Vibroverb.
Yeah. Easy, right? Yeah.
I sure love my Brown era Fender amp.
That's the one I would borrow. That would be the one.
Yeah, the 1960 Fender concert. They're amazing amps. Did you see that? What's his name? Just got one of those. He bought a 61. Okay. The guy he's got a YouTube channel. What's his name?
I'm trying to remember. It rings a bell. I remember someone getting one recently.
Really good guitar player. I'll think of it. Yeah, he just went in and he had a choice between a late 1960 Fender concert and a mid 61. He bought the 61 because it had been rebuilt and was quite a bit cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about those concerts amps, and he didn't mention it, but a couple people did say in the comments, the 1960 Fender concert is really the follow-on to the Tweed Bassman. It's a 4x10, just like the Tweed Bassman. Uses the exact same power transformer, the same output transformer, and the same choke. Exactly the same. So what happened is, as people got hip to these Tweed Bassmen and blew them up, they realized, the amp techs realized that the transformers were in these concerts. So what they're doing is they're taking the transformer out of the concert, putting it in the Tweed Bassman to fix those amplifiers, and then rewinding the transformer that was blown up from the Tweed Bassman and put them into the concerts and selling the concerts off for $500 cheaper.
Right.
So they're fixing a $7,000 amplifier with a $500 fix, rather than have a non-original wound transformer in there. You might have, they call them period correct fixes.
Yes. Billy asks, isn't the concert the Dwayne Allman amp? I'm not sure.
I think he did have one. I think he had a blackface one, though.
Okay. Michael Cross says, I have 2 Fenders, an old Pro Reverb, and a 70s Champ. Would love a Princeton Reverb. Oh, that the new one. I was telling Jim about it. Tweed and the Cannabis Rex in it. Oh, it sounds great. Out of the box. I'm like, I haven't even broken in the speaker yet. And I'm like, good luck to the person that actually buys that amp, Jim, because they're going to fall in love with it. Because I'm going to have that speaker thoroughly broken in by the time that amp is sold. And Mustard asked, was it Chris Buck who shot?
Chris Buck, yeah, that's it.
Exactly. I thought so.
I really love the way that guy plays.
Yep.
Nice. I can't do a bit of it, but damn, he's good.
I'm going to go a few more minutes here, folks. So get your questions in while you can. And let you know I'll be back tomorrow night with Canucks with Guitars, playing some tunes, bad album covers. Got a fresh batch. Hoo-hoo-hoo. Yeah, that's all I'm saying on that. Live Q&A as well. That'll be fun. Got a couple demos coming out this week. I believe an Epiphone Olive Drab Explorer demo. And I don't know what the other one will be. Might even be 2 more this week. It might be 3 demos out this week. Terry says those Cannabis Rex speakers are really popular. Yeah, that's like the, other than the Chris Stapleton signature Princeton, which those are sweet.
Yes, they are.
That's the ultimate Princeton right now for me. Which I think they're still making.
Princeton,
yeah. But this would be the next. But that. Fortunately, that's the one thing. If you're not exactly an expert on amps, but you like your Fenders, know this with Fender. If they release a version of the amp and they bother to put the Tweed on it, snag it. It's the better one. They're going to have a better speaker. It's going to have just better. It's better. Quite often, it's usually a Jensen speaker option.
I find all these artists' signature models of these amps to be kind of head scratchers because they end up costing more than if you'd gone out and buy an original.
Yeah. Oh, it's ridiculous. Tube amps are getting ridiculous. A decent tube Fender combo amp's $2,000 Canadian.
Yeah, when I was complaining about the price of the new Gibsons, fair enough, given the fact of what they did, their prices are probably in line with most manufacturers.
And I think all the tube amps are made in Mexico now, too, for Fender. I think they moved all their amp production to Mexico.
That could very well be.
Yeah.
I really like the idea, at least, of these new Fender amps where they take one and kind of model it and make it all modern, solid state, light, and reliable. I think that's a really good way to do modeling amps without having too many options.
Yeah, just make it like, if you're going to make the solid state version of it, go all out. You're already replicating something, right? Like a solid state twin. Well, all right. Well, it's not a twin anymore. Now you're doing a representation of a twin. So yeah, go all out. Put a nice preamp circuit in it.
Yeah, build it quality, make it sound as good as you can possibly make it to that amp. Make it light, make it affordable. And that's what they're doing. I don't need an amp that has 50
No, like
different
those
amp
Tone
models.
Masters do sound nice. They're just not loud enough. That's the one thing I found.
That's the one thing you will notice about most modern solid state amplifiers. The way they're producing power just doesn't make loud. Tubes are loud. Transistors.
Bo, get a Princeton. Bo's like, when I get a chance, he's getting a 65 twin reverb. Get a Princeton. Get a Princeton. You're building a studio. A studio needs a Princeton.
Again, I like the twin reverb, but unless you're going to play clean, if you're not a clean player, a twin reverb's a waste.
Yeah,
it's loud and clean. It's not a great pedal platform, because it's loud and clean.
Bo's like, okay. He just responds, okay. Sorry for yelling, Bo. It's just, I feel passionate about this.
But I looked at your amp collection behind you when you're on our Buffalo meeting, and your amps are built for distortion. So I take it that you play with a lot of distortion. That's just not what a Fender Twin's all about. There are other Fender amps like a Deluxe that you could pay a lot less money for, that you could push into the nice distortion category that I think you'd be happier with. I'd at least try playing those. And Ben's talking about the Princeton. The Princeton's really just a lightweight version of the Deluxe.
Bruce mentions his Blues Junior in tweed comes with a Jensen speaker. Yeah. Because they're cool. Because they put the tweed on it, they put the Jensen in it, which is, I'm not putting a Jensen in every cabinet, but with a Fender, they work. They work. It does the thing. It's the thing.
I had a Blues Junior. I put a greenback in it, and it sounded unbelievable. I kicked myself for selling that amp.
Stephen Monk Michelli asks, any thoughts on the 1970 Ampeg V4s?
Loud. My buddy who has the jam room that we all go play in, he's got one. They're big and they're loud, and when we start cranking them up, you can hear it down the neighborhood, man. They're loud. They sound great. They're heavy.
He's got two of them, apparently.
Oh, tremendous.
His first one in 77.
Hey, Mark,
welcome,
got a job for you.
Who I think is trying to troll me and failing badly, says their Katana is better than all your amps. No. Because a Katana is modeled after all of our amps. And if you didn't have our amps, you have nothing to model. That's how modeling works.
I wish when I was a kid they would have had these things like these Katanas and all those, because that sure would have been a great way to learn. I remember when I got my first electric guitar, my aunt promised me that she'd buy me an amp. She bought me a Heath kit to put together.
Nice.
It's a 50-watt solid state amp, loud as hell, clean for days. I still have it.
Eric Warrington, he's on his way home from work. Safe travels. Welcome in. Welcome on board. Mike Cross says, Katana is amazing for the dollars. Imagine that being your first amp. Option paralysis.
Yep. Again, as a young kid, when you're starting to learn, it sure be nice to have some choices and figure out whether that in the future, whether you really wanted to be a AC30 player or a Fender player or a Marshall player. But nowadays, you can even go simpler than a Katana, just get yourself a floor unit, a Helix stomp, and be done with it. You have all the stomp boxes and you have all the amp models you'll ever need for $600. How much are those Katanas now? 400?
At least. That's right. Mayhem brought his over, and it was supposed to be like 100 watts. And I'm like, why can I sit next to it and crank it then? if it's supposed to be 100 watts. I'm like, I don't think this thing could keep up with a drummer. Maybe a light drummer. None of the Neanderthals that I always played with for drummers.
Yeah, how do they determine that 100 watts? I mean, is it in the 8 ohms? What kind of speaker load, An efficient speaker can make 100 watts.
I go through presets for half an hour, and then I turn it off and call it a day. And all I did was noodle for half an hour clicking through presets. Like, this isn't guitar playing.
And I get that, Maybe it was a good thing that all I had was this option, and you got to make it sound good.
Yeah, like my first day of my own, I'm trying to think, was a solid state Hohner keyboard amp, 115, and it was only one channel, clean. And if you wanted it to be distorted, I had a distortion feedbacker from Boss. It sounded like ass, and that's what we did.
It's kind of like our discussion of whammy bars before we went on the air. I just never grew up playing whammy bars, so that whole thing of the Floyd Rose is lost on me.
Yeah, which was hilarious because I was talking with them last week with RJ. By the way, great hanging last week. RJ were a killer, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know all his tricks." And then he puts out a Steve Brown guitar demo this week and does all the whammy bar tricks. I'm like, wow, you learned a fuck of a lot of tricks in 4 days, RJ. Almost left that comment. Almost.
RJ's a great guitar player too.
Yeah.
I'm not a great guitar player.
I bet you. I bet you, RJ. It takes a buck or two to get him off the couch. Like, he's basically retired from gigging, but then Corey Taylor's doing these shows in Japan, and RJ's the guitarist for it. Okay,
I would have never put those two together. They just seem like such vastly different styles.
Yep. But then again, RJ can cover a lot of territory, right? And it sounds like Corey does like to cover a lot of different territory over the course of his show. Sort of like the Nick Carter show currently going on, where Pete was playing guitar, and now it's Sean from Smash Mouth playing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was the most head trippy thing in the world, was the fact that you got Nick Carter, who we've known about for decades, but not a fan, whatever. Pete Thorne becomes his guitar player for the tour last year. I was like, hey, I know his guitar player. I consider him a friend. Pete can't continue the tour because he's doing classic rock show. Sean Hurwitz takes over the gig. I'm like, also a friend of mine. Now, I'm in small town Ontario, and I know his last two guitar players well.
Yeah, Sean's a good guitar player too.
Yeah. Let's see. Bo says a guitarist is a guitarist. Learn fast. Yes, RJ has been trained well. RJ has been trained well.
Yeah, they have, it's like Tom Bukovac. He can listen to the song and in real time write out all the chord sequences and everything. I don't have an ear like that. No, I'm sorry, I just don't.
Yeah.
Could I? Yes, but I've never put in that work to get there. If I wanted to do that, I'd take Rick Beato's ear training course, because I have a feeling I can get there if I put my mind to doing that. But I'm going to be 61. What the hell?
Yeah. I hear you. Oh, Patrick Trakes makes it right in at the end here. He says, my first amp was a 20-watt RCA tube amp with one volume knob, one tone, and a 10-inch speaker. For distortion, I used an old AKI tape deck in record mode.
Okay, yeah, we talked about that. Before there were pedals, people put stuff through the tape decks and stuff to get that preamp boost to drive things into distortion.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, those are, a lot of those amps that were built by Valco, they became Silvertone and Sears amps and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. All that was just those companies taking the Western Electric catalog and schematics and making guitar amps out of it. Mm-hmm. That Leo Fender did the same thing to start out with. His early amps he had to pay royalties on.
Exactly. There we are. What's up, Seth? Good to see you. So on that note, we'll definitely do another one of these because Jim's he's my amp guy. He says it's a hobby, but he knows more than me, and that doesn't take a lot to impress me, folks. Really. No, it's always fun hanging with Jim. I think we definitely covered. Oh, it's Charles Green right at the end. Look at this,
Charles.
And yeah, always fun. I think we did a pretty deep dive on the Gibby amps then and now and how they compare. And
I forgot to show up one thing. If you're interested in Gibson amplifiers,
yes,
this book was published in 2009, and it covers basically everything but these latest amps. Covers everything up through the Gold Tone series. It has
what's up, Keith H?
It has pictures of all the models and just basic descriptions. Plus, the guy who wrote this is one of the foremost experts on Gibson amps and kind of covers all the stuff how it was all developed and all the way through the history of Gibson.
Very welcome, Mark.
And if you really want, it even comes with some schematics on CD-ROM.
Nice.
All those schematics are available online. You don't really need
that. Bruce, okay. Bruce says, where'd it go? Dang it. Everyone's chatting. There we go. He says, excellent hang. Jimmy is as cool as the breeze. Love it. Love it. Man, folks, if you have an extra question for Jim, click the join button down below because he's usually hanging in the Water Buffalo meetings. So click the join button because generally every meeting someone will have hey, Jim came across this. What's your thoughts? And you'll tell you. And advice. It's gold.
And I'm not afraid to say I don't know, but I'll look it up. I have a lot of references. Right. I have other friends who work on amps. So
nice. And again, next week we got Michael Torin coming on. That'll be fun. We'll talk some more amps and rack gear. I'm really interested in the rack gear, what he's got, what's new, and see what's up with him. And then the week after that, apparently, Josh Tamberg. Yep.
All right.
Missed it earlier. What's up, Gear Junk 35 and the Community Pedal Board? That's a long name, but that's okay. So, on that note, we've been us, you've been you. So, hold those doors open. Let Charles Green ahead in traffic. He would have got here earlier if you let him ahead in traffic. But then I wouldn't have got here till now. Well, we all make sacrifices.
He was just too scared to take a right turn on a red light.
Well, this is true, too. So, hold the line, Jim, and we'll talk off air. And be good to each other, folks. Happy tone chasing. See you tomorrow night. Don't let her.